Welcome to a new episode of the Success Grid podcast. Today I have with me Storm Cunningham. He's the Executive Director of RECONOMICS Institute, an author of The Restoration Economy, Rewealth and Economics, The Path to Resilient Prosperity. Storm, welcome to the grid.
Thanks, Hussein. Appreciate you having me on your show.
Awesome. So, Storm, give us a little bit of history of you and the RECONOMICS movement, let's say.
Well, it kind of got started back in the 80s when a German scientist who was working in Jamaica was working on some technology to restore coral reefs. And I didn't think any such thing was possible, but he needed some divers to come down and help him out installing these technologies on the ocean floor. So I did that, and I saw that places that had been totally dead, just totally destroyed coral reefs, in just a few months were coming back to life. And that's when it suddenly hit me that we don't need to be satisfied with just sustainable development. Our world is in pretty bad shape right now. And, who wants to sustain this mess? We need to revitalize and restore and regenerate and redevelop, bring our cities and our natural resources back to life. And so he showed me that that was actually possible. And then about 10 years later, I started writing my first book, The Restoration Economy, which came out in 2002. And then I had a second book came out from McGraw-Hill in 2008 called Rewealth. And just last year, my third book, RECONOMICS, came out.
Good. So why do you think that the planet is in bad shape?
Well, because my eyes are open. I can see it. And also I'm old enough to remember what it was like 50 years ago. And even 60 years ago. It's when I was a child in New Jersey, I'd go to a local creek, and this was not out in the country. This was in the city. I'd walk through the stream, and it was full of life, full of fish and crayfish and dragonfly larvae and newts and salamanders. And it was just full of life. And these days, you walk through any stream anywhere in any city in the United States, and you see nothing. Maybe a few invasive fish species, but and so the kids these days, they're growing up thinking that that's normal. The trouble is that with each generation, our standards get lower and lower and lower, because the creek I saw when I was a child was in much worse shape than it had been a century before that. So my standards are lower. So
with time, you think it's going downhill more and more with time? There is no improvement or back to life in a way, let's say.
There's been some improvements. For instance, here in the States, about 40 years ago, we passed the Clean Air Law and the Clean Water Law, and those have made a big difference in the health of our rivers and our lakes and in our air quality. So on some standards, it's been getting better, but with population increases, we've got twice the population now that we had 50 years ago, and the planet isn't getting any larger. So what happens when you have a growing population in a space that's not getting larger? Eventually, catastrophe hits.
Exactly. So what does RECONOMICS does for this?
Well, there are tons of professionals out there right now, engineers, architects, planners, ecologists, who are doing projects that restore ecosystems, restore watersheds, restore fisheries, clean up contaminated industrial lands, redevelop vacant spaces, restore historic buildings, rebuild after war and catastrophes. And all of these are elements of the restoration economy. It's over $2 trillion a year. The missing thing is at the community level or the regional level or even the national level, when politicians promise revitalization or they promise resilience, they don't have an actual process for doing that. At the project level, all these professionals have a process for restoring a building, for restoring an ecosystem. But at the level of revitalization, there's no process. So these community leaders, the mayors, the governors, they just do a bunch of individual projects and hope that somehow magically revitalization will appear if they do enough good things. So what RECONOMICS Institute does is we train people in the process that actually produces revitalization and resilience.
Okay, cool. So you said like maybe these kind of things, the processes may be failing that people are doing.
It's not that the processes fail; it's that they don't have a process.
Okay, cool. So they don't have a process to process the resilience initiatives for places and yeah. So they have a vision, a strategy, or a plan to do that, or do they do anything about that?
Yeah, that's a good question, because those are, the vision, the strategy, those are elements of the process. You have to have a vision. You have to know where you're going. So a vision basically is a cohesive set of goals. So that's where you want to go. The trouble is that most communities these days have a vision. They're very popular. They do visioning workshops and bring everybody together, and that makes people feel good. It makes them feel like the government is listening to them. The trouble is that many times these are just exercises. They're just political exercises, and the vision is never really used. It just, at the end of it, they just write the vision down, they stick the document on a shelf, and it's forgotten. So you can't have a vision without a strategy. The strategy is how you turn a vision into success.
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, that's the only purpose of a strategy, is to produce success.
A lot of governments, let's say governments, they make plans, like you said, they put it on a shelf and didn't do anything about that.
Yeah, well, plans are different. The plan, there's a whole industry that has arisen. It's billions of dollars a year that produces plans for politicians who have no intention of ever using them. Plans are very popular amongst mayors because it makes them look like they're doing something. And all they have to do is write a check, and there's no risk. So they write a check to a planning firm for $100,000, and maybe a year later, they get a nice big shiny plan, and they hold it up, and so they get publicity when they commission the plan, and there's no risk. They get more publicity when they receive the plan, and still no risk. The trouble is that if they actually try to implement the plan, there's risk, and politicians don't like risk. So that's why they put the plan on the shelf and forget about it for 5 or 10 years. And then they can announce, oh, we need to update our plan. And now they can write another check and get another no risk success.
Yeah. A new one comes along, and we have to update it, and nothing happens. Yep. So what are some of the most inspiring and dramatic stories of places coming back to life have you seen in your life?
Well, I've always mostly been focused on nature. I love seeing ecosystems and fisheries and watersheds come back to life. But really, the most dramatic stories are the ones that involve cities. For instance, the very first city I ever ran across that had a real revitalization process, a complete process, was Chattanooga, Tennessee. And that city was dying. Their air quality was so bad that you had to drive with your headlights on in the middle of the day, just to see where you were going. They had tremendous racial problems, crime problems. They were losing all their employers. Their economy was going down the toilet, and the city was dying. And the local people decided to clean up their air. And they actually were the first city in the United States to win the Clean Air Award nationally. and that it did so many good things for their economy that they decided to, since they had somehow learned to work together to achieve that air quality improvement, they decided to keep on working together to revitalize the whole city. And they went from being the filthiest city in the United States to being a poster child of revitalization. When I was there 15 years ago, there was a study group of government officials from Vietnam who had flown all the way from Vietnam to see the Chattanooga miracle.
So, can people make an effort to refocus their experience to be leaders in their communities, to make places better in their communities? How can people do that?
Yeah, you mean how can ordinary citizens help revitalize their communities? Well, the most important thing they can do is help educate their community leaders about how to actually achieve revitalization or resilience. So they have to make them aware of the elements of the process that are missing, because most communities have some elements of the process. It's just common sense. If you talk to any business person and ask them, why is your business successful? It doesn't matter whether they're producing clothing or cars or food or whatever. They'll say, well, it's because we have a good process for turning these raw materials into this finished product and distributing it. But the problem is the communities don't have any process like that. So if an ordinary citizen were to, even if they just read the book, RECONOMICS, they would learn the process, and then they could show up at government meetings or city council meetings or whatever and say, look, you folks have done a good job with creating a vision, and you've got some plans and you've got some projects, but what you're missing are these elements. You don't have regenerative policies to support this work, or you don't have regenerative partnerships to attract more resources. And so they can show them that there are 6 absolutely essential parts of the process, and they might be missing 1 or 2 of them. And if a process is missing key elements, it's not a process.
Yeah, exactly, definitely right.
Now, the other thing they can do is if they want to go beyond just reading a book, they can actually go to RECONOMICS.org, which is the RECONOMICS Institute, and get certified as a revitalization and resilience facilitator. And then they can actually do this for a living. They can actually earn money.
So my next question is you said to get certified and make money. Is there an economic benefit in this area for people to build a business and make money?
Oh, yes. Cities are spending billions of dollars every year trying to revitalize, and most of them fail. Probably about 90% of revitalization and resilience initiatives fail, either completely or just partially. And so if somebody has the knowledge needed to help increase the success rate, then cities are very much willing to pay for that. They don't want to keep wasting all this money.
Yeah, exactly.
And the nice thing is about the process doesn't cost anything. It's the projects that are expensive. The process costs nothing at all.
Can you expand on this a little bit?
Well, I mean, the process is really just a way of organizing the efforts. And organization really it's not a capital intensive thing. It's not like you have to buy bricks or concrete or wood or get people to assemble something. So the basic process is very simple. Number one, you have to create an ongoing program. If you don't have an ongoing program, you're not going to build momentum. And you need momentum in order to inspire confidence in the future of a place. That's the most important single outcome. If you're not increasing people's confidence in the future of a city or a country, then it's not going to attract employers. It's not going to attract investors. It's not going to attract residents. In fact, it's going to keep on losing them. So you've got to increase confidence in the future, and that requires an ongoing program. And then once you've got that, the first thing to do is create your vision, like we talked about before, then create a strategy to achieve that vision, and then look at your policies and make sure that your public policies are actually supporting this regeneration. and then form some partnerships to attract resources so you can actually do projects, and those projects are the last part of the process.
How all this can help the low income minorities, do you think?
Yeah, that's the important thing about the vision. The vision is the most important place to bring in all the stakeholders. And if you're doing a good job of it, then that will include literally all the stakeholders, meaning low income people, racial minorities, anybody who's normally left out. They get into that visioning session, and if they do a good job of creating a shared vision of the kind of community they want in the future, that revitalizes economically in a way that's equitable, where everybody gains from it, then, and if you've got a good process, then that vision will drive the strategy, it'll drive your policies, it'll drive your partnerships, it'll drive your projects, it'll drive the whole revitalization program. So that's the vision is the key to that.
Good. Do you think that people should do that should help restore the planet for a living in general?
Well, they already are. It's about $2 trillion a year. A lot of them are very large companies, big engineering design companies that do multi-billion-dollar projects. Like in Florida, here in the States, we've got the Everglades Restoration Project that's $15 billion. So these are huge projects that are going on, and there's a lot of money to be made, both for the big companies and for the individual consultants and designers.
Yeah, cool. So, but I see, I don't know, maybe some people, for example, plastic, some people think that it's not important issue. So these people, I think they are lazy, or do you think they are lazy towards the environment?
Well, yeah, laziness often is just a matter of lack of motivation. So, if you're asking somebody to spend their time as a volunteer to go out and pick up plastic from the beach, then yeah, maybe they won't do it because they don't have any motivation. They don't care enough about their community to do it as a volunteer. But if you can show them, if you put together a revitalization or resilience program that's funded, and now you've got a beach cleanup project that will pay people to go out and clean up the plastic. Yeah, now you've got something that's going to motivate them.
Exactly. So speaking of like time passing by, how were things like in the 80s and 90s in your vision compared to now?
There's been a lot of growth of restorative development. Back in the 80s and 90s, everybody was talking about sustainable development. And there's been some good things that have happened under the name sustainable development. But really, the world is in much worse shape, especially as regards the climate, than it was 40 years ago. So obviously, sustainable development overall is a failure. If it were a success, then the world would be in better shape now and the climate would not be in crisis.
Okay, can you explain to us how the economy is impacted by the environment?
Well, the entire economy is based on our natural environment. It doesn't matter whether you're producing clothing or iPhones or what. It takes 10,000 pounds of natural resources to manufacture an iPhone.
Yeah, exactly.
So, there's just one iPhone takes 10,000 pounds of natural resources. Most of it is water, but also energy and raw materials from the mining. Just the plastics in there. So, if the economy is destroying the natural environment, then only the economy can restore it.
So, are you one of the advocates for not making project like factories or buildings in nature, in the middle of nature, in the forest?
Oh
like
yeah, obviously.
Putting the yeah.
If we want to revitalize a place, we have to focus on revitalizing the individual properties that are currently just lying fallow, that are unproductive. So before you go out and put a factory in the middle of farmland, where you need that farmland to feed your people, or putting it in the middle of a forest where you need that forest to produce clean water for your people. Why not clean up a place that was developed before? It might be contaminated now, but you clean that up, you put the factory there, and now you've not only got a new factory, but you've got a portion of your city that used to be derelict and unproductive, and you've brought that back to life. That makes a lot more sense than destroying something valuable to create something else that you consider valuable.
Yeah, exactly. So, do you yourself do consulting with companies or with the governments?
Yeah, most of my consulting is with the governments, local governments, but I do occasionally get brought in by private companies. I just had a call 2 weeks ago from a very, very large global engineering firm that said that they said basically that they're tired of just doing individual engineering projects. They want to be able to supply a more complete solution to cities and regions. And a complete solution these days basically means revitalization or resilience. And so they were wondering, how do we do that? And I told them that the most important thing would be to incorporate a complete revitalization and resilience process into their offerings. That way they can take the expertise they already have and just package it within this process. And now they've got a complete solution.
Cool. So, can you give us some reasons to be optimistic for the future?
Well, the fact that the restoration economy is growing so fast is probably the most important reason to be optimistic, and individual aspects of it. For instance, regenerative agriculture. Back when I wrote my first book, which I started writing in 1996 and it came out in 2002, I had a chapter on regenerative agriculture. But back then, nobody had ever heard of it. It was just a very few people who were working on the concept. And then what happened was, basically, when I described it, regenerative agriculture was a way of farming that rebuilt the topsoil. So after every crop, you had more topsoil and better quality topsoil than you had before. And you also had helped restore native pollinators and the local biodiversity in the process and restored the watershed. But then what happened was about 7 years ago, they found out that regenerative agriculture also sequesters tremendous amounts of carbon, that regenerative agriculture actually stores 4 times more carbon in the ground than reforestation does. So all of a sudden, regenerative agriculture became a climate solution too. And that was the magic key. And now everybody is doing regenerative agriculture. Major companies like General Mills are dedicating millions of acres to regenerative agriculture. So that's very optimistic.
Cool, great. So, can you give us one takeaway from this episode?
Well, it really just depends on what people would like to do with their lives. If they would like to end their lives looking back on a lifetime that has left the world a better place, then I would say figure out a way to get involved professionally with community revitalization or climate resilience or natural resource restoration. There's so many opportunities to do it. And they don't even have to change their current profession. At RECONOMICS Institute, we've got graduates who were architects, engineers, lawyers, even.
Cool.
People who are involved in fields that had nothing to do with nature or cities. But when they added the Revitalization and Resilience Facilitator certification to their resume, now they could apply their legal skills or their design skills or their planning skills to revitalization and resilience.
Cool.
So it's a way of revitalizing their own lives.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
the fact is, what we restore restores us.
Exactly.
What we revitalize revitalizes us.
Exactly. We live on this planet.
Yep.
So, how can people get in touch with you, Storm?
Well, if they go to stormcunningham.com, that's my public speaking site, and we've got links to all of the organizations and my books right there on that one site, stormcunningham.com.
Cool, awesome. Thank you for being here today with me on the Success Grid podcast. Storm.
Yeah, thanks, Hussein. Appreciate it.